Go.
And we're live. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am some gadget guy, Juan Bagnell. I am joined by the illustrious Enobong Etteh from Board@Work. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. As you said, this is a happy day.
This is a very happy day, and we've got two very important stories coming out of the FCC this morning. One is much bigger than the other, so we're going to start off with a smaller story that was announced earlier this morning, that the FCC will be supporting the petitions that were sent to them regarding community-funded or taxpayer-funded broadband in North Carolina and in Tennessee. So that first of all is just an exciting step forward in setting a little precedent. I just kind of wanted to get your reaction when that news dropped this morning. We were obviously all waiting for the reclassification announcement to come down the pipe, but that was sort of a nice little hors d'oeuvre before the big news dropped later. I mean, just about an hour ago that we actually got the word that the reclassification was going to take place. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the community-funded broadband effort in those two states.
It's great, especially those two. I mean, not just those states, but also you think about those types of states, especially where you have more rural areas and states that don't have a lot of mega or big cities. You know, it's not, to me, I call it just more competition, and it's one of those things where, as a consumer, where you know you're gonna have, if your state is giving you better internet than Comcast or Verizon or Time Warner, then those companies have to shape up too. They want that business, you know. So if they, I look at it again, it's just great competition overall, and it's nice to know that communities can come up with such options, and at least it's available now. At least it sets a precedent to say, you know, if I live in, say, I don't know, I was going to say Wisconsin, but I was going to say Montana.
Oh yeah, I mean, Montana's an excellent example. I come from New Mexico, and there are plenty of areas like throughout the Native American reservations, and then some of the smaller little pocket cities and communities like Gallup, New Mexico, Las Lunas, Belen, that aren't necessarily tied directly into the infrastructure of Albuquerque, for example.
Yeah. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense, you know, for those communities, those towns. You know, it could be something where a bunch of communities can come together and say, hey, look, we can do our own municipal, fiber optics or network, and then roll from there. And that, because you know, most big businesses, you know, whether they're evil or not, they're thinking of maximizing profits. That's
right. And throughout all of this conversation, I think one of the things that I definitely want to steer away from is any kind of like emotional motive from a multinational organization.
Yeah,
you know,
like you're not built that way.
Telecommunications company. It's all about profit, which is why I feel there's been some frustration, because I think we've been getting this sort of this they want to have it both ways. They want to have no competition, but then they also want to hide behind this idea that it's not profitable, which it's true. It's not going to be tremendously profitable to roll out high-speed internet solutions to rural communities, but that means we have to have some other solution in place.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you know, for me, it's good ruling, great. I love to see it expand to more communities, and more communities take up that challenge and say, hey, we can do this. And because to some degree, you know, the expansion of our technological infrastructure has to have two approaches, or even more, at least more than one. It has to be more than just the company saying, okay, you know, where, you know, remember Verizon 5 years ago were like, all right, we're going to do Fios, and now they've kind of rolled back, because even for them too, it's just a lot of money you're spending. And then you also have to have these small approaches. You almost have to have like pods around in different areas, and once these pods grow, then they connect to the larger network. I'm not saying that they get bought up by other companies, but I'm saying that if you think of it as that way, as a two-prong approach, where there's the smaller and there's a larger and then a medium approaches to it, then we'll see this, you know, this big great nation get connected in a much better way. Because I'm tired of, and this has nothing to do with this really, but I'm tired of, like, you know, yesterday we were playing Call of Duty, and because somebody has a fast connection, he's moving like Flash on screen. That is not cool. Okay? That is not cool. Makes me look bad.
I mean, just outside of the larger concerns of maybe providing hospitals with better resources for patient information, schools better resources for educating the next generation of Americans, my Call of Duty was lagging, and that's unacceptable.
No, but I'm bringing it to what matters to some people. I mean, you know, it's what matters to you, and But the fact that we have that capability is always great. So I'm all for it, and I'm happy to see it.
I think it's also important to sort of reiterate that within this, while it sets a precedent of the FCC backing a petition like this, I think it was very interesting that they were very specific in how they worded their release on these two states. And I think it was very much because of the way that those state laws were written. The FCC believed they had a claim to preempt those state laws. That's not going to be a blanket policy for the entire United States. I think we still have something like 18 or 20 other states with similar laws on the books, and with each state, those laws are worded in very different ways. So the FCC is not making a carte blanche, we're overriding states' rights statement here. It's that they looked at the specific wording of the laws in North Carolina and in Tennessee, and then they also looked at the benefits that came to Chattanooga. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Chattanooga, Tennessee, it is a taxpayer-funded, also subsidized by a grant from the Department of Energy, but they were the first community in the United States to have gigabit Ethernet, to have gigabit fiber internet to the house. And the Department of Energy is looking at this city as being a possible framework for the future of the United States energy grid. So that as we start rolling fiber, we can also better control our energy concerns by using this really high-speed broadband infrastructure to the home, to each individual home. So I think that was a very special use case that the FCC was looking at as well, because there's already a lot of infrastructure being poured into this one little city in Tennessee, which is funny because the Tennessee conservatives are so against allowing the rollout of this service to other areas of Tennessee outside of Chattanooga. So I don't think this is going to be an immediate change nationwide. It's not going to completely undo state law nationwide, but I think it's a step in the right direction for us to start applying similar measures or similar petitions in other areas where the state law, the way the state law is written, it makes sense to combat that issue.
Definitely true.
So, but that's the small news.
Yeah, that was the small news, but it affects all of us because you can take that ruling and challenge.
Right. It gives other smaller communities a framework to work within to say this is how Tennessee was able to arrive at this. This is how North Carolina was able to arrive at this. But moving right along, because now we've got the biggie, and like I said, it was announced about an hour ago that the FCC. I'll actually just read the headline, because I like that they even went bold at the FCC with the headline. The FCC adopts strong, sustainable rules to protect the open internet. It's a really happy day that a lot of us advocates, I'm sure Enobong was right there with me, that we were concerned that we might never see a day where our government regulatory agencies were in support of net neutrality. And it looks like we've got the first big vocal framework for supporting a free and open broadband internet online community.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember we were talking before this when you shared the document from the FCC, which is 5 pages. I think this is on page 2. What I like was the bright line rules. It says no blocking, no throttling, no paid
Actually, let's read through those, because there have already been a number of concerns. The conservative talking points. Actually, I shouldn't say conservative. The Republican talking points on this are starting to dredge up a number of FUD scare tactics to try and dismiss this, and I think it should also be pointed out that the vote at the FCC was split entirely on party lines. It was a 3-2 vote in favor of these new rules, and the Democrats have the majority in the FCC right now, and that's why we arrived at this today. But
it wasn't a landslide.
It was not a landslide. It was definitely a close vote, and one person swapping sides would have made all the difference. But that's also it's also interesting. We can talk about the sort of political aspect of this just a little bit later, because I think it's interesting that Republicans, I don't want to say conservatives, Republicans have been so against this, but the bright line rules for the FCC's open internet protection are threefold. They are no blocking. Broadband providers may not block access to legal content, application services, or non-harmful devices. No throttling. Broadband providers may not impair or degrade lawful internet traffic on the basis of content, application services, or non-harmful devices, and no paid prioritization. Broadband providers may not favor some lawful internet traffic over other lawful internet traffic in exchange for consideration of any kind. In other words, no fast lanes. This rule also bans ISPs from prioritizing content and services of their affiliates. So, I mean, we've come a huge way from the original open internet order that Verizon sued the government to get rid of, to the FCC proposing fast lane policies, which would have allowed for paid prioritization, to now them flat out saying you can't block, you can't throttle, and you can't pay for faster traffic.
See, my question here is Netflix going to get recoup some of the money it's already paid to Comcast?
And I don't believe so, and we'll actually talk about that in just a bit because of the protections for ISPs and carriers that are actually built into this announcement as well through forbearance. That's another complicated subject, but I kind of feel like I really do believe that money was given prior to
it was last year, so
that's kind of too bad, so sad. But I wanted to get your take, especially because we had a really long conversation during one of our weekly tech hangouts about fast lanes. And I mean, it wasn't that there was conflict, but there were some issues where people were some people were concerned in our group hangout that with more services streaming higher and higher quality video, and how there are going to be issues with bandwidth in some communities. Especially watching the FCC flip, where they last year were in favor of fast lanes, are now saying absolutely no. Kind of wanted to get your take on that change of perspective.
Well, I mean, last year I had already given up hope. I thought I was going to pay more for Netflix, which we even saw anyway, because Netflix kind of increased their prices. All these services I use, from Netflix, Hulu, even YouTube at some point, because they push so much traffic. I had already come to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm going to be paying for this at this point. And watching the FCC flip, and knowing that the vote is 3-2, it's a very party line thing. And that can go into a lot of politics, which I don't want to jump into. But I mean, personally, I'm happy that we've moved away from that, because it's not sensible for business. Because as some people may sit down and say, well, you know what, if you're using more traffic, you should pay for it, right? It makes sense, except you're already paying for it. So here was where the complication was. People like, say, Netflix, since they were the ones in the biggest news there, they were already paying for ISP service from Verizon,
right,
and we are paying for ISP service from Verizon or Comcast. And then Verizon says, well, you're using too much bandwidth, so if you want your customers to watch those videos at anywhere decent quality, forget even high def, trust me, anywhere decent, because they throw this thing down to God knows what.
Or I mean, just preventing your video from stopping buffering. If you just want continuous video. You have to pay. You have to pay for a fast lane, kind of like when you go to Six Flags and you get the fast lane flash pass to go in front of the line. That's what it was. And what that means, of course, when you do that in Six Flags, you pay an extra $30, which means Netflix was paying an extra $30 million, and we were going to receive that $30 million payment in increasing our fees. So that's what we're worried about. And now that that's not happening, at least for now, let's put it that way. It's a good thing. And one of my fears last year was like, hey, what, people may say, well, it's Netflix, it's Hulu, stuff like that. But I look at it as like, okay, if I have my own website, you have your own website. Say we blow up and it gets really big, and we start hosting our own videos. We're like, what, YouTube is great, but we're getting so much traffic, so we have videos on YouTube, we have videos on the website too. And because we're pushing, say, 40 million views a day, Comcast calls up, is like, hey, Booredatwork, yeah, you're pushing a lot of traffic to those videos. So if you want your people to actually watch that, you have to pay. And that's the problem. I'm not Netflix. Or I would, even if I made those kind of strides, I still wouldn't be Netflix. But I still fall into that category of them saying, hey, you're using more traffic.
It's not like you're not. You're
And
actually using traffic, and that's the
and I
case.
mean, historically, we have a pretty good precedent in any other industry when additional fees or costs are levied at a content distribution service or a manufacturer. Those extra prices are basically just handed right back down to consumers. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
if Netflix had to broker individual deals for every single ISP, then we can imagine that that would be a very costly endeavor for them, which means it would be very costly for us. I think the best way that I ever had to explain this double dipping that the carriers and ISPs were sort of engaging in was sort of making it a loose metaphor to like driving a car. So I mean, how far would you say you drive a car in any given week, Enobong?
Me, I probably drive. Let's call it 10 miles.
10 mile in a week, like 10
Yeah, in
miles.
a week. Yeah.
Okay, well, I probably end up doing like 30 miles a day in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So because I am driving more, I should have to pay $10 a gallon for gas, and because you're driving less, you should only have to pay $3 a gallon for gas. And that's kind of what the opponents to net neutrality are saying that they're loosely in favor of. If every company can go out and broker their own deal for data infrastructure and for interconnectivity, because that's another thing that we're going to talk about here in just a second from the FCC's announcement, then that means that they're allowed to charge more per megabyte or more per gallon of gas for the same traffic to reach those customers. And that's really what the big concern was, because if those rules went into place, if fast lane rules went into place, then that meant like the sky's the limit. You can start charging whatever you think the market can bear to decide who's going to win, because only the companies that can afford to pay for those faster lanes are going to have the prioritized traffic. But that is going to be another thing that they're addressing on interconnection, and that's sort of the behind-the-scenes web relationships that a lot of consumers don't really interact with. So when you have Verizon and you've got Netflix, there are servers in between them that dictate how fast or how slow your connection to that service is going to be.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go ahead and read this point blank from the announcement. Interconnection, new authority to address concerns. For the first time, the Commission can address issues that may arise in the exchange of traffic between mass market broadband providers and other networks and services. Under the authority provided by the order, the Commission can hear complaints and take appropriate enforcement action if it determines the interconnection activities of ISPs are not just and reasonable. So not only are we saying directly Verizon cannot throttle traffic, we are also seeing the FCC for the first time claiming they have authority over the regulation of the backbone, these interconnection servers and how data moves from a Verizon to a Netflix to your home, that they're going to be in charge of that relationship as well.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, when you just going back to that analogy of paying for gas. It goes a long way to say that yes, the FCC does control it now, but also again, even if some of these companies don't want to comply or try and find other loopholes around it, someone like a Netflix or Hulu can go up and say, hey, seriously, here's our complaint. This is what they're doing. This is what they're trying to do here. So at least that puts some regulatory oversight.
I think it's public transparency, because not only will Netflix be given those tools, because I think Netflix has always had the ability to make a lot of noise. They started doing their own published speed tests, as YouTube, Google with YouTube did as well, where they would start shaming various ISPs who weren't necessarily delivering data as quickly as they were claiming to. Now we also have, I think, it's really more just we know who to turn to now.
Yeah.
Before we had clear-cut rules on regulation, it was sort of an open market. You could complain to your ISP, but you couldn't really complain to a government agency because no one really had purview over this relationship, over this conduct. And so now, even as consumers, now we have, whatever your feelings on government infrastructure and government regulators, we now have an outside third party, outside of Netflix. If you complain to Netflix, there's not really a whole lot they can do about an interconnection between them and your ISP. You can complain to your ISP, but it's unlikely that they're going to do much if they're the ones degrading the service. And now we've got a third party that we can turn to address some of these concerns, some of these complaints, and especially when consumers complain en masse, which we've seen apparently every now and then. Consumers can affect change with government regulations and the relationships between businesses and our government. Now I think we just have an actual point of contact. We actually have a reference that people can turn to for help with situations like this.
Yeah, I think the other thing I hope this does, but since it's technically classified as a utility now, is that I hope this helps us improve our infrastructure. I mean, considering our infrastructure, I mean, we let's put it this way. When I first came to the U.S., right, internet was fast here. Everywhere else in the world, it wasn't. I had one of my very good friends used to live in the UK. I laughed at how fast the speeds were, and then overnight, internet became slow. I mean, granted, it's gotten faster, yes, over the years. It's improved, but in comparison to the rest of the world, where especially think about it, when you start something, when you're first on a race, and then halfway through the race, you're now maybe 10th, 20th. Who even knows what the number is? I mean, it's one of those things that I want to see. I want to see. Hopefully, this can help in some way improve our infrastructure, because we need to improve infrastructure. And like you said, for schools, for research, education, and even down to our entertainment. I mean, because it's
and the future of all commerce and all communication is basically going to be built on this. I mean, even down to silly things like try and imagine applying for a job and not having some kind of data connection in this job market today. Yeah, I mean that's not a Hulu concern. That's not a Netflix concern. That is an everyday American concern. I need to be able to upload a file onto the internet so someone can see my resume and I can be competitive in this job market. And if you can't do that reliably, you can't do that reasonably, you can't do that cost effectively, you do not exist in this job market.
Yeah,
you are instantly off the grid. So, I mean, even down into small things that we just sort of take for granted now with the way that we've had relationships. And it also speaks to, I think it was last month, where the FCC reclassified broadband as being 25 megabit down, 3 megabit up. Because it used to be something ridiculous, like 3 down, 1 up. And that's not high speed. That shouldn't be what we think of as broadband internet. So to address your comments there, though, I really don't think in the near term we're going to see this reclassification of the internet affect much change at the ground level for the relationships that consumers have with their ISPs and with their carriers. Yeah. And that's actually, I mean, I'm really glad you brought it up the way you did, because that leads us directly into pages 4 and 5 of the press release from the FCC, where we start talking about forbearance. To rewind just a little bit, one of the companies that I think was a huge beneficial voice in this conversation was actually Sprint. For all of the fun that I make fun of Sprint for being the 4th place carrier in the United States.
Yeah, yes, they are number 4 now.
They are number 4 now. I actually really appreciated their stance on net neutrality, because they were they directly benefited, Sprint and T-Mobile directly benefited from when the cell phone industry was reclassified in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Prior to 1993, it was basically a duopoly, and there was very little innovation happening. There was very little movement or progress happening in the cell phone industry, and so then the wireless communications industry was reclassified as being Title II, and it rose a ton of competition, and that's really what I'm hoping to see over the next several years. But immediately, the talking points coming out of the very partisan individuals are how this is going to be horrible and this is going to stifle innovation. Well, the FCC has already addressed a lot of those concerns, and there is a process called forbearance, and this is actually a bold, underlined bullet point in the FCC's ruling here, is that forbearance is a modernized, light-touch approach to regulation. And so there are 2 pages of what the FCC will not be doing in regards to how business is conducted at the ground level with consumers, and then even climbing into carriers and ISPs' relationships with cities, municipalities, and states. Yeah. And just to kind of go through a few of these, major provisions subject to forbearance is rate regulation. The order makes clear that broadband providers shall not be subject to utility-style rate regulation. If you're doing business with AT&T, AT&T still sets the bar for how they're going to charge you for their product.
Yeah.
You will not all of a sudden have a relationship with AT&T that resembles your energy company. You know, like that's not going to happen. What was the other one here? The universal services country does not require. That's more funding for state and federal programs. Broadband service will remain exempt from state and local taxation under the Internet Tax Freedom Act. So already we're not going to be seeing additional fees coming from the federal government or from the state government. So if we start seeing additional fees coming from ISPs regarding this issue, that's them. That's not the state and federal government. That's them making more money off of us by charging more fees. The FCC will enforce the open Internet rules through investigation and processing. Fostering investment and competition. The order forbears from applying utility-style rate regulation, including rate regulations or tariffs, last-mile unbundling, and burdensome administrative filing requirements or accounting standards. So basically, when this ruling came down, we saw a rush of GOP talking points talking about how this was going to be terrible. I actually have a quote from one of the FCC chairman.
State your mind, Chairman. Let us know.
And sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, so this is from Ajit Pai, one of the two Republicans on the FCC, who voted against this measure. That the regulatory proposal abandons 20 years of bipartisan consensus to let the internet grow free from utility-style regulation, which he's on the FCC, he's a chairman on the FCC, and the rules clearly state that you are not going to have utility-style regulation as part of these new rules, and he's already talking about it. He's already dredging up an old fear, uncertainty, doubt, a FUD.
Let's just call it. He's lying.
It's very duplicitous the way that.
No, I'm just gonna call it a lie. This is the best thing anyone can do, especially now that the FCC only give us 5 pages. This is not a 300-word document. This is not like Obamacare that was a long list, right? Best thing is, and we'll share the link with the FCC documents. 5 pages. You can read it for yourself. It's also pretty plain and clear.
It's very clearly written. I mean, there's one page that deals with the Telecommunications Act, and so they've got a lot of, and it references this subparagraph, this subsection, and that's a very, very small part of what is otherwise a very clearly worded and clearly written rule proposal by the FCC.
Yeah. What I'll suggest is forget party sides. I don't care what party you support or anything, but for your own benefit, just take a look, read it, and see where the FCC ruling actually stands. And it's clearly for your benefit, not your party, not your affiliation, but for your benefit. Because it's always good to educate yourself with these kind of things. That's why I say it's just a lie, because I'm tired. I hate. It's politicians. They're all professional liars. I know how it is. Professionals. So it clearly states that's not going to happen, especially when you have a clause section that says this will not happen.
Right.
So
and that it's very clearly worded. I mean, again, anytime someone brings up a talking point, so there are 2 major talking points that are coming out. One is this idea of hijacking your rates and services, and that the government is going to be the one that tells you what kinds of plans and services you're going to have. That is not true. And if anyone brings that talking point up with you in any kind of discussion over this, you can
page 4.
Page 4 of the FCC's rule proposal deals with forbearance. And already you sound like a law professor, and you're already way ahead in the conversation. If you guys get into a debate on that. But the other one that's really irksome is, unfortunately, from some of the other companies. I have a great relationship with AT&T, but some of their public talking points have been also mired in this other talking point where we don't want to have the same regulations that Ma Bell had in the 1930s. you're going to hear that one trotted out a lot also. Like, why would I regulate the internet, which was born in the late 90s, with the same rules that wired telephones and Morse code machines had to deal with in the 1930s? And if anyone brings up that talking point, we can point to companies like Sprint and T-Mobile, who would not exist today if the cell phone industry had not been reclassified as a utility in the mid-90s. I mean, we already have a tremendous amount of precedent that whenever an industry becomes stagnant, whenever the cell phone industry is a duopoly and it's not advancing, when the broadband infrastructure in our country isn't improving as quickly as it should be, these types of regulations can actually help foster more competition. And this is why I'm actually pleading, because you guys should actually have a pretty good idea by now that I'm one of those really obnoxious bleeding heart liberals. For my viewers, for my friends, for my family, for everyone who's following us, Enobong and Board at Work, and the teams of people as we're discussing technology, this is a very, this is why I'm really shocked by people who are supporting the GOP on this, because I think this is a very clear issue that conservatives should be in favor for. This institutes a regulatory framework which makes competition on the internet tremendously Darwinian. You will succeed or you will fail based on the merits of your business, and that's it. No one's going to get in your way. There are no gatekeepers now through the ISPs or carriers telling you you can or cannot do business on the internet. It's going to be up to you and your hard work, and that's it. You have the same tools as everybody else. You get the same benefits and the same drawbacks. And this, to me, is a conservative ideal. Coming from a military family, this is something that I was raised to respect. You know, you pick yourself up, you work hard, and you will succeed or fail based on your own merits. And we no longer have other people in your way to say you can or cannot do those things. And that means we need the regulation to enforce that framework.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and it's true. And if you go back to, the mobile industry, like you mentioned, look at what has happened in the mobile industry in the last 3 years. Remember, if you go back the last 10 years, 10, 20 years, everything got split up, the creation of T-Mobile, the creation of Sprint.
And we had a ton of regional and smaller
Regional and
carriers.
small. Now, yes, they've been swallowed up, so we have 4 major ones, right? But what happened also was, AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile. That didn't go through.
Well, and
T-Mobile,
before even those mergers, we also saw a rise in sort of third-party MVNOs, which I don't think we would have seen the same infrastructure of people being able to lease time off of a major carrier's network.
Exactly.
The cell phone industry hadn't been reclassified.
And what does that mean for a major network? More money.
More money.
More money, yeah. And then you have people like T-Mobile bucking trends, changing, which helps the consumer because T-Mobile has forced AT&T and Verizon to add new features, drop plan pricing, maybe not to their level, but they still drop the pricing because they have to compete.
Yep.
They've also added things like, we all know we all love our cell phones. We like to upgrade. Now on every carrier, you can upgrade every 6 months, which you could do in Europe long time ago. But you can do that now. So that's what competition brings. Now, as a consumer, you're going, whoa, Verizon's so cool. They let me do this and do that. They wouldn't do it unless they are forced to because of competition. They didn't complain about it, now think about it. If this was something that was forced by a regulatory body, by the government, they will complain that they're being forced to do that.
Right.
Once T-Mobile did it, didn't even say anything. They sent us press releases. Here, we're doing it. That's the difference. That is the key difference. Because you know very well, if this came from a regulatory body, Verizon, AT&T, even T-Mobile and Sprint will say, you know what, no, we don't like this. Like, you're making us, spend more money to do this. But once a competitor says, you know what, I need to do something drastic to take that edge. And T-Mobile, we all know how T-Mobile's CEO is. He's like, we're doing drastic measures. They do this, and then AT&T's like, whoa. Yeah, guys, we're doing that too. I mean, you want 3 months to get your phone? Sure. You can have it. And that's what it brings. So that's what this is going to do for the for broadband and internet services, is that you're going to see eventually more competitive pricing, more competitive structures, better planning, This is something where, companies, companies, if you're smart, I start going, okay, how can I bundle and move some of my TV packages and make it an internet package and carry some of those things over so that I can still, even if charge more, but I'm giving people something that fits, their profile. Taking that Sling idea, and if I'm Comcast, I take Sling idea, I bundle it as an internet service.
Right.
Done. I don't even call it cable. I just call it, your internet service. Done. You're getting TV anyway.
Right. So here's actually something that, as a quick tangent, here's actually something that I kind of wanted to ask you about when this came down, was we talked about the idea of no prioritization. We didn't have fast lanes, we didn't have any kind of carrier or ISP prioritization for certain types of lawful traffic. So what do you think this is going to mean for services like on T-Mobile, where they allow you to stream music and it doesn't count against your data plan?
T-Mobile, I think, is still going to stay.
No. I mean, like, because that is technically a net neutrality. Like that walks away from net neutrality by T-Mobile saying data costs this much, but if you use a music service, it's not going to cost against your data. That is technically a benefit to the consumer, which could be argued is a paid prioritization on their network.
Yeah, that is actually true. It depends on, I don't know the proper backbone. Is all these companies paying for it, or is it something that T-Mobile has looked at their data sheets and said that this doesn't actually eat chunk of our data? If it doesn't, then it's still, if T-Mobile had looked at the data and said, when our consumers use our average is 5 gigs a month, and they stream a lot of music, but that streaming, because of streaming services like Spotify, which uses less data and all that stuff, they only use a gig a month. Then we can offer that for free. Now,
so, that's also one of those things where we don't have any transparency on how those deals were brokered, because we know not all streaming music apply to T-Mobile's plan. It's not just any streaming music.
Although T-Mobile has the thing where you can vote for which services. I put it in quotation because, again, we don't know. Vote. Because remember, when they started off with Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play was not there initially. At launch, I think Google Play joined maybe like a couple of weeks later. So since there's no transparency there in terms of who's paying, who's not paying. If no one's paying, then it's cool.
Right.
If somebody's paying, then it just flies in the face of this.
And we instantly follow. So I mean, like, if anything, that's like one of the only examples I think I can bring up, because AT&T fronted. It wasn't at this year's CES. I think it was at the CES 2014.
Paying for apps
back in January, where they were saying like services could pay AT&T to be sponsored, to have sponsored data, so that their consumers weren't getting hit with data charges, and the industry went nuts and slammed it. It's a terrible idea. It was going to wreck net neutrality, and then T-Mobile just went and did it with streaming services, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" So I just kind of think it's funny. It's like one of the only casualties of this is the only casualty I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, true, but then again, too, I don't think Apple is paying. I have a feeling. I just don't think Apple is paying. But I could put it this way, right? With T-Mobile's case, I can frame it. T-Mobile had looked at the data and they said, this is how much it's costing us in data. But if we tell people you're consuming music, and we know Spotify and iTunes are really it's what everybody does with their phones other than surfing, then we take that hit and we get customers, and voila, they're number 3 now. So it could be also just a sheer business decision of saying, the cost of this does not overall affect our overall margins. I mean, yeah, we may make less profit, but we're not, going in the red. So that could be the case.
So we do have a couple comments just floating around. This is from Twitter. This is ZeroAlucard27, and he has a question. I wonder what this does for Google Fiber, though. And my personal feeling, in the short term, we probably won't see much change in the rollouts of new infrastructure. This is really going to be more about policing how business is currently being conducted on the internet. But I think this will open up more potential for state and city governments to say, well, if this is a utility service now, we can work out deals with carriers and ISPs to allow for the use of public infrastructure. So like if Google Fiber goes to a city council and says, hey, we want to roll out fiber, it would be like a case-by-case basis, and it would depend on the state law and the city law, the municipal law. But that might allow Google to use things like telephone poles, so that Google doesn't have to dig their own trenches. They can use the public infrastructure to string fiber that way. But I don't see that happening. I don't see that really changing, those relationships really changing in the near term, probably in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, 2 to 3 years. But I think what will change, add some change to that, is actually whoever is the smaller IPS provider, ISP provider, I say IPS, right? ISP provider that uses this as a way to drum up marketing noise for a push is what will start to change. It's like the T-Mobile effect. It's the same thing. Whoever takes this momentum and says, we are trying to provide you because, you know, it's your right to have the internet. You know? I mean, serious. That's it. It's your right to have the internet. So we're trying to give you this. You know, we're the guys for you. And then people like Comcast and, you know, AT&T are going like, oh, hell no. No. We need to find a way to provide some of these services and, like, you know, work our way through. And that's when you now start seeing that change. You know, like I said, it depends on who. Maybe it's even some of the satellite providers who, of course, have no infrastructure technically to lay down, faster internet. So this could be a way for them to jump in or partner with a smaller company and move forward. So that's where I see some of that, and I agree with you, 2 to 3 years. You know, it's something where maybe next year you start seeing more of the grumblings. And you know,
I think starting 2016, we're probably going to be seeing a rush to fund competition in this space.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's when we're going to start seeing smaller companies starting to try and raise capital to build out networks and systems in a way that they can get better data products to their.
Yeah, but also, you know, I mean, but see, you actually bring a point, which actually could help still improve the infrastructure by finding better ways to actually improve the infrastructure, not through its normal means. You don't always have to dig or what do you call it again? Use telephone poles.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, maybe we could have floating balloons at a certain height. I don't know.
We should start seeing some novel applications of how it is that we spread and enhance this infrastructure, because one of the primary arguments, the same thing we brought up at the very beginning of this video, is how do we serve the underserved? How do we provide better tools for people where it's going to be a challenge? I mean, just because we've instituted these new rules and we've got some precedent for allowing communities to build out their own infrastructure, it doesn't mean that we suddenly have the money to do it, and it doesn't mean that we have the best tools to do it. So I think it's going to take at least those 2 to 3 years just to do the fact finding. I mean, how do we just stringing electricity to some of these areas can be challenging, let alone getting phone lines, getting copper, then getting fiber out to these areas is also going to be a profound challenge for a country as large and as diverse as the United States.
Yeah, I mean, just, you know, how you could have one of the solar drones that circles an area for, you know, 6 months. And then another one goes up and takes over.
Well, I mean, like, it sounds ridiculous because it does sound like science fiction, but it's not too far off from saying, like, you can get your internet off of a satellite if you point a satellite dish in the right direction. That for temporary build outs, and it's also things like AT&T has these amazing, like, little mobile units.
Yeah.
These big old trucks that go out to, like, events and stuff, and they can, like, broadcast an extra 4G tower or something. So it's not completely off base to think that we might be able to create some kind of low power, localized drone like system that can then work with satellite internet or satellite providers.
Exactly. Yeah. Damn, we should start that company quick. Come on. Let's do it.
I got to patent that idea right now, except that I think Google already did with their balloon concept when they were talking about
Facebook has the flying drones.
Right?
Yeah.
And Amazon's already working on delivery systems in there. The FAA is going to have to get involved. It's going to get ugly.
It's different. Ours is different, okay? Ours have colors. and comic book names.
Yeah. I don't
That's
know how
it.
that's
That's
different. I don't.
that's not
Well, and if anything, that's going to be even worse because then we're going to have to like work out
between
licensing and
Marvel
trademark
and
deals with Marvel and DC.
DC.
So we've got a couple other comments here, and some of them I'll have to just address like writing out replies. But we've got Titanic Guinea Pig asking, what about taxing usage? And I think that is addressed in this rules. Again, if we're going back to pages 4 and 5 on this announcement, that broadband service will remain exempt from state and local taxation under the Internet Tax Freedom Act. Rate regulation, the order makes clear that broadband providers shall not be subject to utility-style rate regulations. Again, I mean, we're hearing these danger points, these scare tactic, FUD comments coming from especially the GOP members of our elected officials saying, oh, this is what is going to happen and your rates are going to go up and all these things. It is very clearly written, it is very clearly worded that not because of the FCC, if there are any changes to how you do business with your carrier, how you do business with your ISP, it's because your carrier or your ISP is deciding to change how they do business with you. From everything that I'm reading right now, coming directly from the FCC as the source, I do not see anything in this literature which would lead me to believe that carriers and ISPs are suddenly going to be hit with tons of new regulations that are going to be costly to implement. They're going to be getting tons of new fees and tons of new taxes. I am not seeing this. And if someone is better versed in any of this, is maybe, you know, like able or has access to information that the FCC is not providing as publicly, please drop us some comments below, because I would love to have a conversation about what this actually means for how money comes out of my pocketbook for these types of data services.
Oh yeah, definitely. We have one more in the Q&A here from Perry Frink. He's asking, does dial-up internet connection still exist in the state of North Carolina? Dial-up still does exist. No, I don't know about North Carolina, but I know it does exist.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the market looks like in North Carolina. It's more for a lot of these areas, especially these rural communities. As long as it's some kind of township, there's probably a very good chance that they're being served by some kind of DSL style product, which is still far removed from phone line service or God, I'm taking it back. If you guys remember ISDN service, where you would have to have 2 phone lines to get like a 128 kilobit data connection. Oh man, those are the dark days. And yet, when they were new, it's like if someone had ISDN, that was amazing.
See, I was spared from that. I went to college and we had
You go straight to a T1.
We had a T1 connection.
Oh man,
and it was golden. It was so good.
Megabit
T1 is
not.
Yeah. You know, even though T1 technically is not as fast, but just because, you know, it's structured. And then I came and I stayed with my uncle for a bit, and he had dial-up. Oh my god! Once I found that I could get Comcast 5 megabit internet, I was like, I'm paying for it. He's like, no, I'm not gonna pay for internet. I'm like, I will pay for it. I don't care. I can't do this. Like I went from like, you know, high speed to crawling, not even walking, just crawling.
Yeah. Well, but for a lot of these communities, Perry, that are dealing with, I mean, so they say like, okay, maybe you have a DSL option in your area. That might be their only option, which means there's no competition, and that's really the only thing that we've seen that really does help improve rates and service. So when Google Fiber rolls into an area, all of a sudden we see rates get far more competitive, and we see infrastructure improve. And so this was also one of the major announcement changes that the FCC made, and we touched on this briefly, was that broadband internet now must be classified as 25 megabit down, and I think it's 3 or 4 megabits up. And that was for a lot of these communities, and I'm sure what some of the people in North Carolina were dealing with, to the point that they decided to pay for their own broadband infrastructure, that they were probably not getting anywhere near that kind of service. And so that means if you're in an area where you're not getting at least 25 down, 4 up, you no longer have broadband internet. It doesn't matter if it's coming on cable. It doesn't matter if it's coming through DSL. The new classification is 25 down, 4 up, which is still not that fast. So that's where I'm hoping that we see some progress, that the new classification rules for broadband have gone into effect. So if you're going to call your service broadband, you have to be able to serve at least that much. And
Yeah.
now, hopefully, with the first thing that we talked about, that communities might have better tools to circumvent state law to build out their own taxpayer-funded broadband endeavors, that we start to see a little bit more grassroots discussion at where we can find new avenues of competition. And if the internet's utility in states and cities decide that they want to let companies use public resources like telephone poles to string fiber, we could see an explosion in the next 3 years of gigabit to home, gigabit to business, in a way that the telecommunications industry was completely incapable of delivering to this point.
Very true.
Well, I think we've talked about this enough. This I mean, like, just to kind of tie everything back in, and being the bleeding heart liberal that I am, this was just such a
liberal.
But this was such an exciting morning for a very complex issue, and one that I feel has been predicated by the noisiest, most obnoxious members of both sides of the aisle. From the sky is falling liberals that I don't necessarily align myself with, to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt Republicans that I don't think speak for most conservatives. That to finally get to this point where we at least now have an understanding of the rules. This is kind of like, and you brought up Obamacare, and I think this is something that goes hand in hand with Obamacare. Whatever your feelings on the Affordable Care Act, one of the most detrimental aspects of that legislation was just the unknown. So before the law was being voted on, before the law had been approved and had been signed by President Obama, we just didn't know what the healthcare industry was going to look like, and that did way more damage than I think any of the prior or after. Just not knowing. All these companies didn't know how they were going to do business, and I think now we have a better framework in place for the future of our telecommunications industry. So whether or not you're for or against this, we at least just know. We know what this is going to look like moving forward, and we have better tools and better resources to regulate it moving forward. So that, to me, becomes the ultimate victory, is now we can move forward. Now we can move on. We have a number of people on the Hill in the GOP that are probably going to try and fight this. I know a lot of telecommunications companies are probably not happy about this ruling coming down, but we can move forward now. And especially for consumers, we have better tools. We have better resources to fight inequity. We have better tools and resources to fight when our favorite services are getting throttled by the gatekeepers to the internet. So that, to me, becomes the biggest plus of this. And it was a day I really didn't think would happen. I really did not think we would ever see an FCC that would side with net neutrality, especially going back to it was the Michael Powell days of the internet regulation at the FCC, when he was chairman of the FCC, Colin Powell's son. I really felt that we were on a track that was going to lead us to a very, very divided, tiered internet service, and thankfully now, hopefully, we can see the tides turning against that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and it's good to see that. We're not. Again, like, it was literally 5 months ago that we thought the world was going to end.
Yeah, I was really cranky. I was Chicken Little. I was one of the people who was actually doom and gloom about this entire process.
I mean, like, I had already taken that point as being like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to pay more. I had accepted the fact that I was going to pay more. That was in the back of my head. I'm like, that's it, done. But it's changed, and we know we're still going to get rumblings from Republicans about this. They're going to complain. And my own advice, again, to anyone is simply this: it's a short document, it's 5 pages. Just check it out, quickly read it. It's not hard reading. At least you know what it is, for 2 reasons: to educate and inform yourself, and also just in case your ISP decides to charge you more money.
That's actually a great point too.
That's for your personal benefit. That's probably the most important thing you want to know, is that they can't and should not charge you any fees other than whatever you've been paying in the last couple of years. Anything new, starting as of March, your March bill, I'm serious, check out your March bill just to make sure. but at least you have a document in hand, and again, we'll have it for you in the description here. So, it's a good thing, and just be informed and stay educated.
I mean, knowledge is power, and now we have a little bit more power to arm ourselves with how we do business with various companies and entities. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on this video. I want to thank all the people that asked questions, Titanic Guinea Pig, Perry, Alucard, Zero Alucard on Twitter. Thank you for joining the conversation. This is a very complex, and I'm sure there are a number of diverse viewpoints. I would very much like to have conversations with you all regarding this. So please drop comments down below this video. You can find Enobong at Bored at Work. You can shoot him comments directly. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel, Bored at Work, to join in this conversation if you'd like to ask him more questions about what we're seeing in terms of government and policy. And there was one last question that Steve Shaw asked on the YouTube page. Are you on any podcast? And that's actually, I'm glad you asked, Steve, because Enobong at Bored at Work and me, Some Gadget Guy, we do a weekly tech hangout. We call it The Weekly every Saturday morning. And you can catch us on Bored at Work's channel streaming live to talk about all of the week's top stories in technology. And just like you've joined us today for breaking news, I hope you guys will join us. Tune in every Saturday so you can talk out some of the hot news, especially as we're leading into MWC. We're going to see a ton of really cool tech announcements coming down the pipe.
Yes,
so
yes. It's 12 noon on Saturday on my channel. And
12 noon Eastern time.
Eastern. Sorry.
Us West Coasters have to get up a little earlier than
somebody's on the West Coast. Somebody decided to live on the left coast, as you would say. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting set of topics this week, like you said, with MWC and all the HTC leaks, and Samsung leaks, and what's new, and then Apple now just announced.
Yep.
So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of stuff. But again, thanks for having me, and I don't know, at some point we should try and put this stuff on a podcast. I don't know how. I want to find the easiest way to do it without me spending a lot of time.
Right, and maybe we'll open that up to the audience too. If you have a way for us to transfer audio easily into some type of podcasting service, we would really appreciate it.
Yeah,
we love us some YouTube Hangouts, but it's really hard to move this content from YouTube Hangouts to other.
If there's any way we can just hit a button that says transfer, done. Right, that we gladly love that.
So again, thank you everybody for joining us. As always, please make sure to subscribe to this channel for more videos and reviews like these. Please subscribe to Bored at Work's channel for, again, amazing content in the technology space and some really fun hangouts and podcast style roundtable discussions that we do every week. We would not be able to continue producing on these channels if you all weren't out there sharing our content with your family, friends, and on social media, so I can't thank you enough for bringing more cool people to the party. Again, I want to thank Bored at Work, Enobong at Bored at Work for joining us. So hit that thumbs up button, and we will catch you all on the next Hangout.
Peace.